Good evening. Well, you've sat through all the preseason games, and now we're into the regular season. Tonight is the first night of the council budget deliberations. Want to thank all the members of staff who are here this evening. Will no doubt be called upon at various points throughout the evening. I sent out, today is Wednesday, October 23rd. So I sent out an email earlier today summarizing the conversation that we had in leadership this morning. The intention is we're going to start off with the list that everyone has seen before about topics that we've been talking about throughout this process. We've also added an additional topic of discussions about ending fund balance. My intention is going to be to go around the room on each topic and get a sense amongst the council members whether there's a consensus on that particular issue. If there is, we will plan on going forward with considering that issue resolved for the further conversation. No, it's not a final decision, but for the purposes of the discussion this evening. After we get through all 6 topics, we will then go to a discussion of potential modifications to the budget, either additions or subtractions off of the baseline budget that the mayor has presented to us. Beth and staff will cover building the potential modification list. At that point, depending on where we are in the evening and how council feels, we will either transition into attempting to address those potential items individually, or depending on their nature and where we are in the evening and whatnot, adjourn and let the administration perhaps fill in details on some of those items or answer additional questions for us, and then resume next Monday. So again, I'll take the temperature of my fellow council when we get to that point. I would imagine that at this point, City Administrator Bobkowitz might have a comment or two to start us off, or not.
No, other than thank you for the guidance. We can maybe just go to the next slide, which is the 6 items. And again, the leadership team this morning added a 6th item regarding fund balance. You have seen the previous 5. Happy to answer any questions as the evening progresses.
Thank you very much. Director Goldberg, do you have anything you want to add?
No, unless I'm not sure if you want to go to the next slide or touch on that as the evening unfolds.
Well, why don't you tee it up so that we have it in our hip pocket for if and when we want it.
Okay, I would be happy to do that. So was asked this today to pull together a couple of scenarios, knowing that utility tax is one of the significant issues that you will be grappling with. Pulled together this table that attempts to show a couple of different scenarios that you might consider with regard to the utility tax. And just to orient you to this slide, the column on the far left, highlighted in green, are the revenue assumptions that were included in the mayor's proposed budget for the 6% utility tax that was being proposed or is being proposed. And then the column just to the right of that, also highlighted in green, shows the impact of the direction that it sounds like the council was heading after last night's discussion about the water rates, to stick with the previously adopted 3.5% water rate increase and not go up to the 9%, as was discussed last night. That does have an impact on the utility taxes, so we've backed that out there. And then what you will see, the columns that are shown then to the right of that, not highlighted in green, are different options and the impact on the budget. So these are all being shown as in negative numbers, which is, if you went with this option, it would be a hit to the budget. We would need to find another mechanism to close that gap. So scenario 1 is the don't adopt any increase scenario, and if the council were to choose to do that, that would create a $1.8 million hit or hole in the budget that we would need to find a way to close. The second option or scenario would be to adopt a 3% utility tax on the city-run utilities and cable. And if council were to decide to do that, that would represent about a $1.1 million hit to the budget that we would need to find a way to compensate for. Scenario 3 is 4% utility tax for city-run utilities and cable, and if the council were to adopt that, that would represent a $711,000 hit to the budget. And then scenario 4 would be to adopt a 5% utility tax rather than the 6%, and that would represent a $349,000 hit to the budget. And then the final column would be to adopt the 6% utility tax as proposed by the mayor. And what's shown there is simply the direction from last night due to the water rates. So hope that kind of orients you to orders of magnitude as you are discussing. I'm assuming you're going to discuss utility tax tonight as you're discussing utility tax this evening.
Thank you. And does anyone have any questions about this information before we move on to talking about the budget topics? Nope. All right. So with that, our first question is around the proposed revenue strategies, the property tax and bank capacity, utility tax, parks fees, and any other revenues. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go around the room, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Ray.
So you want me to just opine on those 4 bullets?
Yes.
I think we definitely need to take advantage of the 1% property tax increase and leverage the bank capacity such as it is. I am open to parks fees increases. I'm open to other revenues as identified. I could get behind a 6% utility tax. I could also get behind a 4% utility tax. So I'd like to have some more discussion about that. So I'm keeping my my options open on utility tax a little bit.
And yes to parks fees and other
Yes,
revenues.
yes, and other revenues too. And if there's other things we can identify, I'm happy to look at those.
Councilmember Walsh.
And you just want question number 1, not
Yep.
1 through 6? Okay.
Correct.
I am comfortable with all of the above. The property tax is a small amount. I don't see that as a problem. The parks fees is a small amount. I don't see that as a problem. The utility tax, the way I'm viewing that, is a replacement for weakening revenues based on consumer behavior of not using the other utilities in the past. So I think that's an important area. I'm open to 5 or 6%. I would rather not dip down so that we have to cut programs or go into fund balance.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Great question. I'm glad you asked. I'm dead set against any utility tax increase, and I think that also includes cable. Right? We already have the 2.33 on water, and the reason being, we know anecdotally why we're having a revenue shortfall. There is a big part of it is the sales tax, and there's maybe some in the retail sector. There's certainly some due to lower construction. We've seen that pattern for sure. And when I think about construction and sales tax for all the retail that we have in town, if you think about the big retail centers that we have, those catch people from way outside of our borders. We know for a fact that we get people from the region around us that come in town to shop. That means everybody is contributing to the general fund who comes here and shops in Issaquah. And the same thing with construction. That is something that's happening here in Issaquah. And if you make a modification, you build a building, do a remodel, it is the builder, that developer, that property owner that is paying that tax. Utility tax is something that will be paid for everybody who gets cable television or water to their line here. And that's quite a different pool to draw from compared to what I just described, people improving their lands or those who are just coming to our town to shop. So because whatever the reasons, we have expense lines and we have revenues that are going on, but I cannot see at all, I'm dead set against any increase utility tax for those reasons, because of it'd be replacing revenue, but coming from a completely different source. So that's how I feel. I feel very strongly for those reasons. And then quickly through the others, I can support the 1%, but not the bank capacity. Maybe it's been brought up in the past, but none of my prior decisions on, in my 8 years on this, or 7 prior to this, were like whether we're going to take the 1% or not, especially those years when we said we took 0. We did not increase the, it was not part of my calculus, and that's a set aside, and if I need it in the future, we can go get that. And so we forego, in my mind, we did forego that revenue when we chose something other than a 1% increase in the past. And as we learned, we've been getting some of that bank capacity anyway, because we learned the other night. And that has basically kind of artificially raised the tax level than it would have been otherwise. And then when you add to the fact that due to less construction, there is less property value being added to what's under construction, which means the balance of our property tax revenue is a greater percentage now is coming to other property owners, including residents. So I think that just with the 1% and not going the bank capacity, fees for parks, there is a lot of those are services, those are programs. They directly affect the people who are paying them, and I understand those. And I'm not going. I can support those as well, and I have no other comments about other revenue sources. But I'll just end up by saying is that I think it's really critical to look beyond 2020. When we look at revenue requirements for the city and the structure that's in front of us now, if indeed in the near future we go out and say, hey, for transportation reasons, do we want to increase our sales tax by 0.2%? It's a much better story to say, when it got tough, we did the right thing. It's another story to say, and when it got tough, we still raised your utility taxes to make up for those deficits. I don't think we want to be in that position. For those are my reasons for my positions on revenue.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. So I think that, as Councilmember Winterstein mentioned, we have some understanding of why we are seeing a decrease in revenue. We have a slowing construction market. We have slowing retail. I think the growth in this region overall is slowing, and I think that for the most part, I think the growth that we experienced recently was unsustainable. And so I think that's part of the natural progression that the growth would slow down, and that's what we're seeing. The important thing, though, is I think that is not that we can't hold the community responsible for that. And so I want to make sure that in our budget, we aren't reflecting in any way that the community is responsible for that change that we've seen and the budget shortfall that we're experiencing. So firstly, I do support the property tax and the bank's capacity. I think relative to some of our other options, this is a relatively less regressive tax. It's, in reading about it, different people have different opinions, but I think this is a tax that we've been increasing gradually, and so we will continue gradually increasing it, and I think that that is the responsible thing to do. The utility tax, I'm interested to hear what everybody's other people's opinions are. My current opinion is that we had a 0 rate for a number of these utility taxes, and then we decided to go in the proposed budget all the way to the maximum allowed by the state. And so that was the 6%. I think it's not responsible to go from 0 to the max all in one fell swoop on all of these different utilities. I think that reflects for planning, I think that we should make changes gradually. If we're seeing a change in the revenue, we should make the changes gradually so that we aren't shocking community members with this increase all the way to the maximum on all of these taxes. So I'm currently of the opinion that the middle increases, either 3% or 4%, would be more acceptable. And then we can revisit that in another year, but I don't think going straight to the maximum allowed is reasonable. And I also want to make it clear that I'm not going to vote for a utility tax increase if I don't have a clear understanding of what the discount programs for low-income individuals will be. There's one line in the budget about we will increase these programs. I'm disappointed with the number of families that are or the percentage of eligible families that are currently using the water utility rate. I think that we've seen evidence that we don't have good, that program isn't very accessible. People aren't using it that are eligible for it. So I want to know how we can improve that, and I also need to know for certain what the other programs will be, because if we're increasing those rates, I think it's really important that low-income individuals and seniors, that we have those programs in place before we increase the rates. So if we don't have a certain program before we approve those rates, I'm not going to vote in support of an increase at all. Parks fees, I think that one of the fees included in this is the Senior Gold Pass. So I'm not in favor of increasing that to quadruple the current levels. Again, this is sort of something where we decided we're going to increase from the current rate all the way to market, or closer to market in one fell swoop, and I think that's not appropriate. And so I think we would be, if we're wanting to maintain this service and the service is valued, which I believe it is, we should increase that rate more gradually, so a more moderate increase for that one I think would be appropriate. I don't have a problem with the parks rate increase for non-residents. I think that's in line with our best practices and other policies, so I'm okay with that. But I think if we're increasing our rates for parks fees, we should also not cut our services for parks. So we'll get to that later, but that I also feel strongly about. And then other revenues. I don't know if there were other big revenues that are being considered, but those are my opinions.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. So I've completely, I think, lost my voice today. So I'm tempted to just have somebody read my comments, and then it doesn't really give my reasoning my reasoning might be a little different, but I'm probably mostly going to say who I align with more closely tonight, because that's probably the easiest thing. I can't write it all out.
Councilmember Goodman can probably support proposed utility tax increases between 4% and 6%. Support of banked capacity and parks fee. Agree with Councilmember Hunt regarding the Gold Pass service cuts.
And service cuts.
And service cuts.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman, with the assist by Council Deputy President Batiste, who I suspect may be in that role again this evening before we're done. Council Deputy President Batiste.
Okay, so starting at the top, I am in support of the property tax in addition to the bank capacity. This is something where over time we've been able to look at that gradually, and I would I would support that. I'm going to talk about utility taxes last. In regard to the parks fee, that was I'm in support of the parks fees. And think, we have people that are coming in and using our parks and everything that falls underneath that. I do agree with Councilmember Hunt in regard to the Gold Pass, and I'd like to take a look at that in a few moments. In support of other revenues, and I need to look at that again. In regard to the utility tax, I think that this has probably been the one piece that's been more difficult for me. I really want to be cognizant of those families that might fall into a low-income bracket, and to really understand what sort of programs that we have. And I know that, in the past with even some of the other programs that we've talked about that have fallen in to that category, that those haven't been really well publicized. So I want to understand that, and also understand our communication behind that. I do, however, understand, where we're at in terms of the revenue shortfall, and that we haven't really kept pace in terms of those taxes. And when we look at that in comparison to other cities, I wish we weren't going all the way from, zero, all the way up to 6 so quickly. And so for now, I would just say that I would be supportive of anywhere from 4 to 6, 4, 5, or 6. I need to, I think a little bit more and talk a little bit more and hear from my fellow council members in terms of 6%, but giving that gradual ability for everyone to understand the impact that's coming, and then know that maybe another impact is coming down the road, at this point is making a little more sense to me.
Thank you. For myself, I agree with the 1%, but I also agree with Councilmember Winterstein. I'm troubled by going with the banked capacity. I voted for a number of those no's in the earlier days, and I feel weird about effectively retroactively changing that vote. So I would be a no on the banked capacity. In terms of the utility tax, I really struggle with the regressive nature of it. I also struggle with not knowing in the end exactly what it means if we do cuts. So if I had to parse a number, I would probably parse it, I'm likely to say someplace between 0 and 3. But I'm eager to, I hope that this issue will stay open and that we will evaluate the options that are in front of us and see where we fall. We need to get to a balanced budget. But that's sort of where I'm inclined. I would also agree, I think Councilmember Hunt summarized it really well, the concerns around both the Gold Pass and the idea of raising parks fees while cutting services. So I would share those concerns as well. That's where I'm at. So as I look at this, looks like there's unanimity on the 1% property tax. There is a majority, although not unanimity, on the banked capacity. For utility tax, it's weird. There's one exact point that has a majority, but not a super majority, 4%. There's people who think that or less. There's people who think that or more. I would be troubled with just saying, well, there's 4 people that agree at this one exact point, and so we should stop there. Unless somebody wants to make an argument otherwise, I would say that this one we leave open and we continue to resolve it going forward, rather than trying to say we've got a clear consensus from the council, because I don't think we do on that one. And then on the parks fees and other revenues, I think you've heard a majority express concerns around the Gold Pass and the cutting services. So I think we need to continue to keep those in the mix. How'd I do? Councilmember Goodman has a question.
On behalf of Councilmember Goodman, for the banked capacity, would we be reaching back to the years we voted to not take the 1%?
You would, in essence, be taking that capacity that the council chose to forego in those years, although it's at that smaller rate.
All right. Anything else? No, okay. So with that, let's proceed to the next one. Next, we have support implementation of the classification and compensation study. Yes. Council Deputy President Batiste.
So in regard to the implementation of the class and comp study, I think that I am supportive of where we are at. I know that in my background, doing class and comp studies myself, and with all the hard work that went into this from the administration, staff, all the department heads, these are never easy conversations to have, and and making sure, I think the most important thing is it had been such a long time since we had done a class and comp study. Now we've come forward and we've had the opportunity to get all the way through this very large body of work. To me, it doesn't make sense to go through all of that work to find out the levels where we should be, and to not go forward with that, because that will just put us further and further and further behind. In regard to the implementation of the classification and compensation study, just in general, there are probably some things that we want to talk about, but in general, I would be supportive.
I generally agree with that.
Councilmember Goodman says she generally agrees with that. Thank you. Member Hunt.
I am generally supportive. The one outstanding issue I had is that I did wonder if there was a way to phase the step, the converting from a 5% step to 3% step in a way that that had less of a impact on the current budget, but it sounds like that's not really feasible from a scheduling point of view, and so with that not being feasible, I'm generally supportive of the strategy.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein.
I support it, but I think it requires a different explanation, a little bit of different perspective here, because to support this proposal actually means to be in support of an increase in overall salary and benefits compared to what we would have done otherwise for 2020. And so that seems really odd under these conditions to say, yeah, but for next year, that's an increase, and I'm okay with that. But I think this is a really good example of what we're trying to do, and this is what I want to do with every single one of these. And this is why I brought up those issues around the taxes as well, is we're trying to take a longer look. We're trying to understand the basis for these expenses or for these revenues or these changes, and thinking longer term and thinking strategically. So while in the first year, this is because of some of those policies, because it's not just the class and compensation study, it's the adjustments that we're making to adopt it that are driving our higher costs for 2020. But in the out years, as we get to 21, 22, and beyond, then the city is in a better position. And so that is why, because long-term it makes sense. It's unfortunate, it is what it is. Again, it's not just cleaning up these classifications or just cleaning up this compensation in the schedule that you have. We're talking about making adjustments to get people more in line, and that's a part of what is going to drive our increased costs in 2020. But long-term, it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
I support this. I think it's something that needs to be done regularly as a best practice. And as far as being a part of the budget, I think it's a relatively small portion for that increase. So I'm not concerned about that.
Thank you. So this actually highlights something that I think I didn't mention in the initial instructions, which is we also have, in addition, as we're going through this evening, we have opportunities to inform the council president's letter on the budget, and I think something having to do with performing the class and comp study more often, because I think it's been quite a while since the last time we had it. I think the conversation was about we should do it every 7 years, I think was the comment.
Yeah, and I think we could say that about a lot of things, like impact fees and other things.
Sure. So I'm going to write down class and comp right now, but I want to, both in this conversation and as we get to the conversation about additions and subtractions, if people see things that they think we should consider putting in the council president letter, let's chat about it. Councilmember Ray, class and compensation.
Super. Really supportive of the idea or the strategy behind bringing everybody into the range, so freezing people who are above and bringing people who are below up. I would really like to see us making salary adjustments once during the year on anniversary dates, not on once at the beginning of the year with the COLA to get you into the right band, and then again on your anniversary date. I just think we're leaving money needlessly on the table. But what really troubles me about the class comp study, and I've said this during the class comp study, is we're looking at salaries, not total compensation. We are paying total compensation. So it's a bigger number than salaries. So yes, if we look just at the adjustments we're making, it's not a huge number in the budget. But if we look at total compensation and how that factors in, it is 50-some% of our budget. Director Goldberg, is salaries and benefits.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I got a lot of numbers in my head right now.
Yeah,
so.
it's a huge percentage of it. And so I feel like if we move ahead by making decisions on this study solely based on salaries, that we're leaving the job half done. And I am fearful that we will be making adjustments again next year to when we factor in total comp.
All right. Thank you very much. So I heard, how did they say in The Simpsons? Yes with a but or no with a maybe is how they used to call it. But I did hear yes with a but, or at least yes or yes with a but from everybody. So, and I'm sure, and I know the administration is taking notes on the asterisks and ellipses that they hear in these conversations. So with that, we will move on to city services assessment. And we've been going in different directions, but I'm going to start with Councilmember Walsh on this one.
So I strongly support doing a city services assessment. I think when we are looking at a situation where there is a weakening economy, which is going to bring other struggles, we need to do that going forward. It's going to put us in a better position. It also allows us to start budgeting based more on the strategic plan. And I think really everything needs to be on the table for the assessment.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein.
In a different year with a different circumstances in our budget, I can understand this. But when you look at the strategic plan work that we've done, and whereas that's not the same as what it's intended to be, we do have a pretty current body of work that suggests to us what kind of the priority of the services provided. So I think given this year, given the budget shortfall, given the information that we already have, and I have another point as well, but for those reasons, I don't think we should do this. But the other point is that I don't usually take stands like this, but I'm skeptical about really the effectiveness of this. I've seen over my years many times when we've gone out and trying to gauge, and we don't engage to get input, we don't always conduct those very well. And truthfully, to be conducted correctly, in my mind, it's not just, what is the most important, what's your priority, what should we be doing? Because I think if it goes out like that, it'll be like the skate park where, the picture was painted and we got back like, the gold-plated skate park idea. And unfortunately, that really blew our budget out. This type of process, really requires a lot of what we do during budget deliberations is that there's a give and a take, right? There's I can do this, but I have to do this in lieu of maybe something else. This costs this much for us, but boy, if we only have this much to work with, I can't do these things. I think, which sounds a lot like a budget deliberation process. I haven't heard that that's planned like that. But I think that that's the fair and equitable way, not only to our citizens, but to a future council that's would ever have to consider that. That's the kind of input we want. One that we know has been colored by certain reality of like, if you prioritize this, it may be in lieu of these things. And those are difficult questions. I think it's a difficult process. This is not laid out to be that type of effort, and so for all of those reasons, I don't think we should do that in 2020.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
I am also somewhat skeptical of the city services assessment, and I say that because I would hate to spend this money in a year where we're contemplating a lot of really difficult decisions about services being cut and increases in taxes and all these things. And we have other data, for example, the National Community Survey that, for example, gives us percentages of respondents that use different methods to get information about the city. And so we can see what percentage of people report that they use the cable TV channel and what percentage of residents report using the website, for example. So we do have sources of information. We also do have a huge body of work that went into the strategic plan. But what I really want from the city services assessment and why I am supportive is that I want to have some options, like solid options for things we could do better. So we have the strategic plan, has actions that we can do that were identified, but we don't have really, I think, the basis for having a really good long-term conversation that would inform some of the alternatives to the way we're doing things currently for future budgets. And so I think we do have those conversations in our budget deliberations about what we can do differently, what we can cut, what we can increase, but we don't, my hope is that the city services assessment gives us a much more solid ground for that kind of work, and I think we're going to have to make big structural changes in the future based on the potential for a weakening economy and potential for having a remaining structural deficit that we're going to have to work on in future years as well. So I see this as a way that we could better prepare ourselves for those conversations. But I think in the scope of this, for me to be supportive, we need to look at all of our services, the way we do things internally as a city, as well as the way that we provide services externally. I also want to know from the community about what they value about the services that are provided and how they're getting information, for example. And so there's a lot that we could learn from this. I don't want to duplicate other surveys like the National Community Survey because we already have that, and I don't want to duplicate the strategic plan because that was also another big investment. But I want options so that we can be better prepared to have conversations about how to meet the needs of the community in the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman, as conveyed through Council Deputy President Batisse.
So per Councilmember Goodman, the city services assessment is vital. Support it 100%, but the council needs to be involved in defining its scope when the time is appropriate.
Thank you very much. Council Deputy President Batisse.
So Well said, Councilmember Goodman. I would echo what Councilmember Goodman talked about. I do support this. I think that as we're looking forward and we're looking at what we could be doing better and what services we are involved in and analyzing all of that, we're going to have to take a holistic look at all of that. It does come with a cost. I would like the council to be involved and have the opportunity to ask some questions about the scope and give feedback about certain areas that the council is really focused on. And if there are, as we look at it one more time and we go through that conversation with council, maybe we're able to uncover some areas where we could do a few items in-house, but I do believe that this kind of large structural survey definitely needs someone to come in and do a full assessment so we can be comparing apples to apples.
Thank you. I also support the assessment. I think that this year, the administration attempted to address funding challenges while the overall structure of, without making any substantial changes in the overall structure of the city. I think we have an opportunity. Somebody said we need big structural changes. I would say we have an opportunity with these financial challenges we are called to look at structural opportunities in the city and say which systems are working well and are highly valued in the community and which are not. And I think that that has to occur. I think you have to bring in somebody from the outside to do that, because I think that doing it internally is just classically that sort of thing. You need an outside objective view to provide inputs and suggestions. And so I think I realize it's a pile of money, and I understand and I appreciate Councilmember Winterstein's concerns, but I am supportive. So, Councilmember Ray.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a necessary thing to do. I think it is part of our long-term strategy. As we start to build a look to the future, we need to know what we're doing and how we're doing it. In the write-up in the budget, it talks about service efficiencies. I'm actually more concerned about service effectiveness. I don't care if we're doing it really, really well. I want to make sure we're doing the right things first. So one of the things as I read through that and I listened to the discussion around the table, I don't think there is a great level of consensus on what it really is. So going forward, I think we need some clarity on what the objective of it would be, what the scope it would be, how would we approach it, and then how can the council support that effort. I think the other thing about this assessment, it's, I think to say it's a one-time thing is probably not completely accurate, but it's not a recurring activity. And so if we're looking for opportunities to maybe draw down on fund balance, this is something where we can move that money out of fund balance and give ourselves some relief in the general fund so we don't have to take the hit from current period revenue.
Thank you. Okay, so we have consensus but not unanimity to do this. I'll just mention that if there's nothing to preclude someone for offering this as a proposed modification down the road, but let's carry as part of our baseline that we do want to include this. I have added as a council president letter idea that council needs to be involved in scoping the city services assessment, which I think I heard pretty loud and clear from my fellow council members. So with that, we will move on to supporting how the budget prioritizes strategic plan investments within funding constraints for 2020. And I'm going to start with Council Deputy President Batisse.
So just from a 10,000-foot level, I think that after going through this strategic plan and prioritizing all the areas that we had, it was obviously difficult to work our way through with the with the constraints that we have in the budget, exactly what was going to be worked on. What I have in my head right now is that I do think that we are prioritizing the areas that we need to. I need to look at this one more time, but there was one area that was, and that's just outstanding in my head, and that was in the area of environmental stewardship. And I know that we were really light in that area, and I'd like to look at that again. I think that there were reasons behind that, but I'm trying to sort of get that all straight in my head. But overall, I think that we did prioritize.
So I just want to make sure I understood right. So yes, but questions around the environmental stewardship option. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
I think so, generally, but I think I might have different feelings as we move along in this process.
Okay, generally yes is how I take that. Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
I'm more of a generally no on this. And I think my reason is really that we did the work of the strategic plan, but then we haven't really looked at how, in a big picture sort of way, to realign what we're doing to address the strategic plan. So I recognize that this was a difficult budget year, and I think as part of that, the budget, the existing services, there's not very much change in what we're doing as a city in this budget. This budget doesn't reflect really any of those big changes. And so I think as part of the city services assessment, that would be one of my hopes, is that we have some action items there where we could do things differently and we could make some changes so that we could align in a big picture, we could align better with the goals of the strategic plan. But right now, I think there was an attempt given the limited budget, but it doesn't feel like the bigger picture goals are being, it doesn't feel like the whole budget is really being looked at through the lens of the strategic plan. Like, these are the essential things we do. This is the strategic plan. And then, like, let's reevaluate all these things that we don't need to do. Could we do them better? Could we do them differently? Could we do them more efficiently? And that would be my hope. But I also realize this is the first year that we've had the strategic plan. It's also a difficult budget year. We also think we need the assessment is also that we need to have something like a city services assessment to better understand what we are doing as a city and how we could be more efficient. So I'm trying to temper that response. And then also with the environmental stewardship, we did receive an email earlier today about how some of the existing things that are covered in the budget can sort of fit into the actions that were identified in the strategic plan. And that speaks to my sort of bigger concern, which is that, we have these items, we're doing them, they kind of align with the strategic plan. And so we're saying that that's how we're prioritizing the strategic plan investments. So I think that there was an attempt. It was our first year. I would like to see more of a holistic realignment to the strategic plan in the future.
So I have that in summary as a generally no. Thank you. Okay. Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, generally, strong yes. When an organization does that retrospective and that we did, and that vetting process that we went through, and we have an opportunity to say, okay, now let's take a look at what we prioritize, and let's see what we can get done, because we have identified these as priority issues. And we knew that there really wasn't a roadmap for us. We didn't say what projects exactly when and how much they would cost, but we had some overall guideposts that were given. And As put forth, there was a genuine, sincere effort to implement what the council had come up with, and really, I think all of us came up with. Council were the ones that get to vote on it, of course. And I think that's the proper way to be running the city, because I do recognize that in the proposed budget that there is a fair bit of belt tightening. There's a lot of the status quo that we don't continue as well. And I think that is a good adjustment for everything that we see in terms of overall expense trends, revenue, and now the first year of having a strategic plan to help us with that planning. So, but anything short of being serious about now moving forward with what we identified in the strategic plan, to me, just negates the whole value of the exercise we went through. So I think that is, can it be fine-tuned? Yeah, we will learn more. That always does happen. But I do appreciate, that the administration did put a priority on those. And I do appreciate, I think my colleagues had pointed out many times about how from the environmental stewardship actions, and I am looking at the email right now that we did receive. It does identify a number of those, and I think that's a good marker that we can point to plans that are, I assume, and I think this is the one question I have about this. I don't know that there are any additional costs or any budget hits to this information that we got today. But that would be really good to get an answer about. But so that was that had been daylighted about the lack of what we could identify as environmental stewardship actions. We've got a response from the city. I think the city administrator is going to respond to my question.
Yes, city administrator.
We believe 2 of the 3 we are able to do within resources. The third is the first one, which deals with codes and aligning the codes to better move us forward in the areas of environmental stewardship. You're going to get a report at the end of November about the Title 18 process, without stealing too much of the thunder there, additional resources may be needed in order to align with the strategic goal. So that would be the only caveat. I don't have a number for you. It's not something that we're putting into the budget, but in my initial review of where that process is, I think we're going to need to make some additional investment in order to get it to where the council would like it to be.
Okay, thank you. You got my response summarized.
Generally strong, yes.
Yeah, okay. And point of clarification for the comments we just heard. I've heard this phrase quite a bit, Title 18. Now, I understand that there is a review of IMC Chapter 18. And are these different things?
I believe that it is Title 18, and then there are chapters within Title 18. My sense, I'm new here, is that staff uses title and chapter sometimes synonymously, but strictly speaking, it is title. Because I was confused too.
In city administrator, you get 3 months. You got 3 months to say I'm new here, but at the end of 3 months.
I'll keep punching my ticket.
Councilmember Walsh.
You know what, I'm still claiming the new card, so I'll give you more than 3 months. But City Administrator Bobkowitz, you stole my thunder, actually, because the thing I was going to say about the strategic plan is I'm concerned about our ability to complete Title 18, the code review, given the fact that DSD has taken a hit in employees and professional services funding. And so if we were going to look at our strategic plan and our ability to complete, that would be my concern. Otherwise, I think we have done as well as we can for a first year of this. In fact, I think we may have taken on more actions than we can effectively do, and I would rather take on a smaller chunk and add to it than take on a larger chunk and be disappointed. But we'll see how that turns out as we all go through this process for the first year. So generally, yes.
There we go. Generally, yes. Councilmember Ray.
Super supportive of the strategic plan. I think as we went into this process, we knew this was our first run at it, and we knew it was going to be crunchy, and we talked about that pretty specifically, that it wasn't going to be smooth, and we weren't going to get it right, and we were correct. It wasn't smooth, and we didn't get it right, and there were things that we need to move forward. But that's okay, because that's the way we'll make it better. So as long as we are still committed to bringing this back after budget, which is what we talked about, and saying, okay, what did we learn? How do we change the process? How do we change the plan? Is the plan correct? Where do we need to refine it? How do we move this forward? I think next year it will be a more valuable tool to help us with the budgeting process, and the year after that, it'll be yet still a more valuable tool. So generally supportive. With my asterisk, my caveat is we still got a lot of work to do on the strategic plan to make it the tool we hope it'll be.
Thank you. I have the summary of that as super supportive. So I need to phone a friend on this, and the friend I want is Councilmember Hunt. I want to ask, I have concerns about the environmental aspect, and I'm wondering, do you have any specific potential budget modifications that if we sort of call this one still open, that you would be able to propose to put more meat on the frame of environmental stewardship?
Well, I think that one big issue, which has gotten I've heard from a lot of members of the community about, is the issue with updating the codes, policies, and standards. And we didn't prioritize any of the actions in any of the strategic plan, but I think that one is an important one. I think, I know, I was told that we were going to improve the environmental stewardship aspect of that code as part of the Title 18 work, but evidently we may need more budget to do that. I think that should be our priority, because every time, as time is passing and we have these codes that aren't aligned with our environmental stewardship policies, I think that's missed opportunity. So if that will require additional budget, I think we should do that. And then we can maybe get an assessment of how much more resources that would require.
Thank you. That is helpful. So given that I did have that concern about our how much we engage environmental stewardship, what I would say is my answer is yes, but I hope to see an addition that would be what we need to do to make sure that we can address Title 18 in 2020. And with that, I think that the questions around Title 18, I think what we heard generally, although not unanimously in support, but with this question around Title 18, so I think that was the consensus that came out. I'm not seeing any furrowed brows, so we will move on. Next, we have the overall approach to balancing the 2020 budget. I'm going to start with Councilmember Winterstein.
Number 6 that was added should have been number 4.5.
Okay, yeah, fine, fair enough. I accept that. Let's do fund balance, starting with Councilmember Winterstein.
Don't take this lightly at all, and I think history has proven that whatever council has been in these chambers going through this budgetary process, we always took very seriously our responsibility to live within our means. And you can go back to 2015 when we actually changed the B&O tax. I think that's when we raised the B&O tax. So the budget that was proposed then actually was reliant upon some of existing cash on hand or fund balance. And the council spoke very loudly and very clearly, and I think that's when we really found our voice, that we shall budget with a plan where the revenue requirements for ongoing, not just one time, but ongoing operational expenses, as covered by the general fund, shall be covered by what we can predict and forecast to be regular revenues from our normal streams. So we talk a lot about using fund balance, but the real driver policy that we've been very clear about is making sure that our ongoing expenses for the coming year are going to be covered to the best of our knowledge by the kind of regular revenues that we expect for the year. And I think that has served us really well. We've also learned this year, and I really do appreciate the transparency that's been involved, that prior years, some of those budget asks probably should have been smaller. We know that there's been quite a bit of truing up this year. And as a result, we were adopting expense lines that were actually higher than we really could possibly spend. And we were matching these expense forecasts with revenue forecasts. As a result, our fund balance kept growing. Though that fund balance grew through the sales tax, property tax, and B&O taxes primarily that was collected from the city. Those taxpayers, that's every one of us here too, if we're a property owner or bought anything, they were paying forward to the city. Now we've got some correction, and so when I use that lens, and I do appreciate Finance Director Goldberg even saying on Monday night, and I shall quote, that the use of general fund balance during the time of an economic contraction is one of the uses cited by that quote-unquote economic contraction during our finance director as one of the potential set-aside uses. If indeed our situation is being contributed to by a change in the economy, economic contraction, and with a big caveat that if we can do a longer-term forecast and don't and if we use some of the, if we say, let's recalculate, let's use some part of our cash on hand, our fund balance, and we can do a forecast and say that, under these assumptions, we shall be okay, but if these assumptions are wrong or too aggressive and things turn even more sour, and we think that's going to be next year, then I might hesitate. And I'm saying, no, let's reduce the expense side line this year. But if we can get by with reasonable people can look at one another and say, this is one of the reasons we have this fund balance, is to handle these circumstances of economic contraction, to help ride us through so that we don't have to be super destructive on programs, that you can't just tear them down on a whim and think we can build them back up, that we have this fund balance that allows us to ride through this. So I think we definitely, this year, should be looking at the use of that, but recognizing, eyes wide open, that a year from now, or maybe even less than a year from now, that a new economic reality might force us to go, okay, that's not going to work. We're going to have to make some really tough adjustments. We're also recognizing that, this worked. We've gotten through this. We've had some recovery, and then we've been able to not only maintain services, but my hope by using fund balance is, and we didn't have to raise taxes, because that helped us get through that. I think that would be a great story to tell.
Thank you. I have definitely as the summary of your comments. Councilmember Hunt.
I also think it would be appropriate to use the fund balance. I think of it similarly, I think, to Councilmember Winterstein, and one additional reason is that we do have a financial policy with a target range that we are exceeding of the reserves that we have. And so we've collected this money from members of the community over time, and I think it is important that we use it to maintain services. And I think that I think there's an upper limit to the target range for a reason. It's not responsible to not spend the money that we collect to provide services if that money is needed to provide those services.
Thank you. I have the summary as appropriate. Councilmember Ortiz representing Councilmember Goodman.
On behalf of Councilmember Goodman, I am not flatly opposed. It depends on what it would be used for, and so long as it complies with the policy we set for that fund.
Thank you. I record that as not flatly opposed. Thank you. Council Deputy President Batiste.
So I would be supportive of looking at using a portion of the fund balance to balance the budget. We've had many conversations around this. We have policies around this, and I would want to better understand where we're at and what we might be looking at in the future. I think that this would be a time where we could look at using a portion, but I would still be in the camp of being incredibly careful and looking very closely at the policy that we do have in terms of what we need and want to retain. My concern is obviously if we hit more of an economic downturn, where we would be. So taking a close look at where we're at with the existing policies.
Thank you. I have that as yes, carefully. So I was on council when, as several others were, when we came up with a financial policy around 20%. And I remember at the time, we actually debated, there were people who wanted it to be 15%, and I was one of the people who said, let's make it 20%. I've always been very proud that we carry a strong and small c conservative reserve on our ending fund balance. But I think I agree with Councilmember Hunt that good financial stewardship says you don't keep a super surplus of an ending fund balance while you increase taxes. That seems like not good financial stewardship. We have in the past talked about having a policy to limit fee shocks when we've looked at large fees in the past. And I certainly feel combining utility fees with utility taxes, in my mind, absolutely qualifies as a potential shock, particularly as I've said earlier, it's so regressive for so many members of our community. So to me, we've also said we want to try to use it for one-time purposes. My hope is that, in my mind, the way I think about it, the way if somebody, at St. Michael's came to me and said, why do you want to use some of our precious ending fund balances? I would say, I'm hoping it's a one-time thing. I'm hoping that, if we in fact hit a sustained recession, we're going to have to look at further challenges next year. But if we step it down, it's less of an immediate impact on people. And my hope is that we don't see a substantial recession. There's, financial indications are all over the place. So I'm comfortable with doing this. I wouldn't want to see us go below 20%, but I'm in support of this. Councilmember Ray.
I think the fund balance is very appropriate for one-time expenditures. So something that it's a one-time thing, such as the service audit we were talking about earlier, is very appropriate. What I don't want to do is to find ourselves kicking the can down the road and deferring these difficult decisions a year or 2 years because we don't want to make them today. So I think we need to step up and say, these are things we need to address. It may provide a vehicle to provide a softer landing, and I think this is where you were going, President Martz, around some of the potential tax and fee increases. So if we can use it to soften the landing, recognizing that those fees and taxes are probably going to have to increase if the economy stays the way it is. I don't want to set ourselves up if the economy doesn't get better and or if it gets worse. And I think not getting better and getting worse are still very possible outcomes right now. So we need to have, at this point, more shock absorber than less. So I'd be up for using some fund balance. It looks like we're targeting about a 27% ending fund balance at the end of 2020 based on the projections. So if we took a 1 or 2% reduction to 26 or 25% ending fund balance, more than the 20% in our fiscal policy, I'm just being extremely conservative because I don't have a great deal of confidence that we're about to hit another period of economic hypergrowth that we went through over the last several years that we would have been riding. So, so to do my summary for you, I am open to it, but very cautiously and very limited and for special cases only.
Okay, but I have that as yes for 1 or 2%, because I guess I'm being the engineer on that. Is that fair?
Not to exceed 1 or 2%, but I think we need to have a compelling reason for whatever we dip into. And I think we need to look at it very seriously and recognize that we could be having the same discussion next year and not have these luxuries, and we will have not taken on our responsibility, which is to step up to this stuff. So that's a maximum. Very, very, very specific things that would make sense to use it for, and really not supportive of ongoing programs if at all possible.
Got it. Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
So I'm a no on this one. I think that fund balance should be saved for a time when the economy is truly tanking or for one-time purchases. I will say the city services assessment for me works for that concept. So if that is something to pull out of the budget to give a little bit of room, I'm open to that idea. But I want to use the analogy of a family budget. You know, when I am saving regularly and have my slush fund there, the only time I'm going to use that is when I'm out of work and I need to use that to cover my expenses. That would be analogous to the economy tanking and we wouldn't have revenues, so that would make sense. Or if we needed to make a one-time purchase like a vacation that we've been saving up for or a medical expense. And that would be things like the city services assessment or something that we've been saving up for like a transportation project. I, as a family, wouldn't use my savings account as a way to cover gaps between income and expenses. If there's a gap between incomes and expenses, then I need to either make more money or spend less, not dip into my savings as a way to cover that situation, particularly if we were in a situation looking at the economy as it is today. So, no other than one-time uses.
Gotcha. Okay. So to try to put a bow around this, I'm hearing a spectrum all the way from folks who are strongly supportive to folks who are pretty strongly negative. And I'm not comfortable saying that this issue has been put to rest in this conversation. So I would like to, along with utility tax, say that this is something we need to spend some more time with, and maybe, you know, as we get into potential modifications to the budget, have further conversation amongst ourselves. Okay. And then to the last question, the overall approach on balancing the 2020 proposed budget, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Hunt.
I think that this budget doesn't make the sort of big changes that we are likely to have to make soon. I think that the hope is on the city services assessment that better prepares us to make some changes. But I think for the most part, this budget doesn't really change that much of what the city is doing. There are some projects, there is some belt tightening around one-time projects that were completed, and not renewing that for a different one-time project to be completed. But at the same time, I don't think that that's always going to work. It seems sort of more like a stopgap while we wait for more information about how we might make bigger structural or bigger changes. So I think there are things that we're going to need to consider, and I'm hoping that the city services assessment better prepares us for that. So because it doesn't really fit into any of the other questions, one of the things that I'm hoping the city services assessment will cover will be things like the jail. We had a discussion earlier about the jail we're not fully cost recovery. We don't have full cost recovery for the operations of the jail. And we are also serving neighboring cities with the jail. So I would like to understand, I would like to better understand that and understand how we might better both serve the needs of the community, but also get better cost recovery if that's an option, because that is a lot of funding, a lot of money. And I think there are other things like the cable TV also. I think we need to make sure that we're getting information to people, but we should take a look at how many people are using different services and make sure that we're getting information to people in the way that they're receiving information these days. So there's a number of big things that I think we should look at. I think we'll be better prepared to look at those in the work plan in 2020, but that all is to say, this budget doesn't look at those sorts of questions. And the one thing that I really don't agree with the overall approach to the budget are things where we cut services, because if we're doing the city services assessment under this justification that we are going to use it to better understand where we could be efficient, then we shouldn't also be cutting services or doing things like increase the senior gold pass. So I think it should be more evenly applied. If that's the justification, then it should be more evenly applied, and we shouldn't cut services. We should wait for that city service assessment to come back with options for how we can meet the needs of the community more efficiently, effectively.
Thank you. I have a question for Director Goldberg. What's the verb in this one? It's support,
Oh,
include,
I'm
support?
sorry. It's support. Sorry.
Okay.
That was
That's okay. So I'm going to ask, it sounds like the answer to this is no, because it's not appropriate to cut services ahead of the CSA, is what I think I'm hearing you say. Is that accurate?
It's accurate. I also don't agree with going from 0 to the complete maximum on the utility tax. So there's a number of issues that I don't agree with. So overall, I would say I don't agree with the approach to balancing the budget.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterstein.
The approach as proposed would raise roughly an additional $2 million in taxes to offset a decrease in our regular revenue streams. And I've already said here on this floor that I think that offset is not appropriate. And therefore, I think that I would have greatly preferred that there were more cost reductions. And I've got a prepared list to offer when we get to those. We actually have a very unique opportunity right now. This has been somewhat of a curveball. We got something thrown our way that was a surprise because, wow, 2019 really doesn't look the way we thought it was going to. Therefore, now we have a better idea of probably 2020, and we're on a trajectory for spend. And yeah, you know what? We need to make adjustments there. I view that as a wake-up call and a really good opportunity for the administration, staff, and the council to demonstrate to those that we serve that when the going really got tough, we had to make some very difficult decisions because our own credibility and when we go out anytime in the future and ask for an increase so that we can do something more because we need more money, that's actually what I'm most focused on. It's been said for years, and every corner of the city, I've said it, everybody here has said it one way or the other. All our constituents have thought it if they haven't said it to us. Boy, I wish we could do something more on traffic. And we're trying to chip away at that. I think the overcrossing is still the holy grail, and I'm glad that it's at least in our legislative agenda. And we've put together a package that we are contemplating, taking to the voters and say, will you help us fund that? That is the perfect time to say, we're going to be banking on the trust and the belief of the voters that we are really masters of this. But recognizing when things don't go right, when we get tripped up, when something's gone awry, and we've recognized that we, on their behalf, made some very difficult decisions to live within our means, to take care of it when we had that opportunity, so that when we go back and say, will you agree, potentially if we do this, will you agree to tax yourself more so we can do some transportation? That's what I want to see succeed. And I think the vote on that starts tonight. Or it starts with this budget deliberation. And this is our opportunity to demonstrate our overall, the depth and understanding and sensitivity that we have of what it takes to really do what's right for this city. And if we're going to get anything done with transportation, it starts with the budget that we do this year.
Thank you. Councilmember Walsh.
Yes, I am supportive of the overall approach to balancing the 2020 proposed budget. I believe the mayor and the administration has taken a good look at the reason for the $5.2 million deficit and used that to decide how to proceed. So going back to the family analogy, if my spending was out of whack, the control there is to cut your expenditures and take a close look at what you're spending. If you're not making enough money because you lost your job, the time is to look at revenue generation. And so when I look at this budget compared to past budgets, I see 3 trend lines. First, that department revenues in previous years were overestimated and in 2019 under-delivered. And so in those cases, some of it is lost revenue, but most of it is just truing up and coming in. That chips into the $5.2 million deficit. And the solution there is to decrease the estimated revenues for those departments along with the expenditures that those revenues supported. And I think that this has been done by leaving certain positions empty and reductions to the professional services costs for those specific departments. The second thing I see when looking at like a 10-year trend is lower utility tax income. And this is caused by consumer behavior, not city action, but it's something that has probably been covered up by productive sales tax revenues over the same period, and so it wasn't noticed. Now we're noticing it, and the proposed utility tax increases directly address that area of reduced revenue, and this is a change going forward, not just a one-time thing. And then the third thing is the weakening sales tax revenue. So in this case, the economic shift that we are seeing does require belt tightening and reductions to potentially to services. I'm not sure if we're there at this point to really cut back too much on services, but the proposed budget addresses this by taking pretty much all of the 2019 professional services spend and not reallocating that in 2020. And that's an actual cost savings where we are tightening our belts, where we are telling the citizens of Issaquah, yes, we are being super effective with your money. We're making sure that we are not spending something that we had anticipated we were going to. And so I think all of those things say, yes, the proposed budget recognizes where we have revenue shortfalls, recognizes where it was just a numbers game, and recognizes where we need to make some cuts, and does that in appropriate fashions rather than just one or the other.
Thank you. I've got that as a yes. And Councilmember Winterstein, I had you as no, would prefer more expenditure reductions as a high level. Councilmember Ray.
I think the budget was very, I mean, let me speak the merely obvious. The budget was very difficult this year. And I think we were very lucky in an odd sort of way that historically we have overestimated the cost of many of the things that we do. So we were able to cull much of that out of the budget. Kind of looking forward, I think that I would support a more moderate increase in taxes, as we talked about before. I think I would support something around one-time fund balances or using fund balances for one-time expenses. I think that we should look hard at how to deal with positions that come vacant throughout the year. So recognizing that we will have turnover, and so we can target how to leave positions vacant. And I think, going back to my hobby horse, I think we need to align total compensation to surrounding municipalities, not just pay. I think that there's probably another 1.5% that we can find in this budget. I mean, that gives us the $750,000. It gives us a little bit of a softer landing on utility taxes. So I'm a yes, but we have work still to do.
But work still to do. Okay, thank you. So, forgive me, some of you have sort of heard this spiel before. The cost of government in most places in the United States is about the same. If you look at state, county, municipal, because in most everywhere, it's police and fire and roads. And then in a city like Issaquah, parks, because recreation and environmental stewardship is something that our citizens have said time and time and time again is important. So that constrains the bulk of what we do as a city, and is going to be one of the challenges we have as we look at this CSA next year. So with that in mind, I tend to be, there's that thing about, do you look 6 seconds ahead of your car, or 12 seconds ahead of your car, or 20 seconds ahead of your car? I tend to look further ahead and take sort of react maybe slower on the steering wheel a little bit. I was looking forward to going to biannual budgets, and here we are still with annual budgets. So which would also slow down the quickness of response. So all this to say, I think this is a very good faith effort by the administration to respond to the economic challenges in which we find ourselves, and I'm supportive of it. But I also think that we're moving the wheel a little bit too far, and I consider the utility taxes to be an example of moving the wheel a little bit too far. So I'm a yes, but on this one. Council Deputy President Batisse.
So in regard to the budget this year, I'm in agreement that the overall approach to balancing the budget was well done by the administration under very difficult circumstances. I know there were really, really tough decisions to make, and I think that everyone really looked across the board in a lot of different areas. There were a couple of things that stood out to me, sort of going from, to the maximum on utility taxes and not having that in a staggered approach, and maybe looking at other cost reductions. And there were just a couple of areas that I'm still thinking about. The capacity building grants, just, I think that, the nonprofit world is so incredibly reliant on those capacity building grants. I see those as a a small part of what we're talking about, and just a couple of the items that fell under the parks fees. But overall, I think that this was a very thoughtful approach to, again, how to deal with a very difficult situation. And I think that we've got, as I look forward, so after going through many different budget iterations over the years, we now have gone through a strategic plan that will help guide the budget in the future. We've got all of the changes, the great changes that have happened under Beth and the team with the finance department. A lot of great information and a lot of great transparency that came forward this year, and everything was put together really well. And so my hope, and I won't be here to see it, but my hope is that this is the start of what can be a very consistent pathway to look at the budgets, because for me, every budget year has been pretty different. And so getting that consistency and starting here and being able to work our way towards some consistency with that would be great. And
So I've got that as a yes, but. And Councilmember Goodman, you get the last word on this section of the evening.
And on behalf of Councilmember Goodman, for the most part, I agree. I am so grateful for all the daylighting in this year's budget process. Thank you, Beth and her whole team. I am concerned about the cuts to the grants and the parks services.
Thank you. So this is the only one of the 6 that doesn't require an attempt at adjudication of a consensus of the body. So at this point, so it's only 8 o'clock, and I am inclined, in the moment, I'm going to suggest that we press on and start delving into potential additions and subtractions, but I want to offer both Director Goldberg and City Administrator Bobkowitz a chance to provide any feedback before we enter that.
Just kudos to the council president for laying out a process up till this point this evening, which has been excellent. I think you have covered a lot of ground. This is all, I think, becoming very clear as to the path that we need to take. And if the council has the willingness this evening now to list any additions, subtractions, that probably then takes us to a good ending point, Council President, for this evening after any initial discussion that you may think is appropriate, and then allows us to digest all of this and then perhaps come back next Monday evening then with a plan that maybe balances it, reflecting the things that we've heard tonight.
Director Goldberg?
Nothing to add, I think.
Okay.
Councilman, I'm now making you an elected official, City Administrator Bob Goetz laid it out well.
Don't insult him, he works for a living. Okay, so with that, we will move into jump ball, and I see, oh, there we go. We will start with people offering potential additions and subtractions, and I will ask, as we go through this, Director Goldberg, if you have questions or clarifications as we're going through this, I would ask that you speak up at that time, so we can make sure. I'm going to assume that if you don't have questions, that you understand it and have written it down and are ready to move on to the next one. With that, I will start with Councilmember Winterstein.
Thank you. This is something actually we haven't discussed yet this season. The budget does propose using approximately $2.37 million of general fund and move it over to the street operations fund. I had asked a question earlier in the season about what's our policy on that, believing that we had one. I think the answer we got back is we don't have one, but I did find some records from 2017 where it was stated, and the numbers that were justified is that of the sales tax a portion that goes into the general fund, that there was a target of 15% of that to go to operations, and then 5% of something we had a capital and capital fund at that time. Now we've rejiggered our capital fund management, so that doesn't quite play in. So Okay, why that background? As proposed, the 2.37 is approximately 14.7% of sales tax in this budget, so it's not that far off to the street operations fund. Now, one way we could, and so this is going to be an ask of maybe some more, to gather some more information, is that one way to spend less of general fund is to reduce that, but look to replace it with REIT dollars. Now, I know that reaches into the plan we have, the longer-term plan we have for our CIP, our capital improvement plan. And that's kind of the impact I'd like to know. But I can see one adjustment being maybe even as high as $800,000, less of general fund going to street operations and retained in the general fund, and something like, which we are forecasting, I think, a $3.8 million balance in REIT at the end of the year. So I know that's an impact, but that is one way to use existing funds on hand and for a purpose very consistent with how we've been using and use REIT this year and next year and have in the past.
Councilmember Goldberg.
We're elevating everyone today, sorry.
I blame you. Director Goldberg.
Mayor Marks, get that right.
We could look at that. What I guess would offer two things. First of all, that fund balance that you've identified in REIT, I believe that is largely the segment of REIT that is not applicable to the street side. I believe that's more on there's REIT 1 and REIT 2. I believe most of the fund balance is for the portion of REIT that is not eligible for street uses. So, but we can try and tease that out. And then, the other thing that I would offer is we went through the budget, we did try and find as many things as we could that we could put on REIT. We can look again, and then just the budget director, finance director, and me is always uncomfortable. REIT's a volatile revenue source, more so than sales tax. That there are ongoing street operating needs to tie that to REIT. More so than what we're already doing. We're already doing it quite a bit. It's something that the council should think about as it considers that strategy. But we'll look at the fund balance. We'll look at what expenses might be eligible, and we can certainly offer something for you all to consider.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just for everybody, just a reminder, like this budget does call for using, I think, 860,000 of REIT just for Munis. And I don't know about, I don't know which of the portions of REIT that's in, but I mean, that's a pretty significant chunk of change for REIT. I had forgotten about the different actual restrictions on the sources that go into REIT. It wasn't really teased out that way this year in the document, so thanks for the reminder. But again, what I'm trying to do is are there other revenues that it would be appropriate? And if you're wondering, it's also one of the reasons I was fighting against REIT on Monday night when it came to the cameras. Can we do it without using REIT dollars? Because I wanted to maybe preserve some of that balance for this type of use.
Thank you. Does someone else want, Council Deputy President Batiste. Oh, not Council Deputy President Batiste. Councilmember Goodman.
So what's the actual question for us?
The question is, do you have proposed additions or subtractions from the mayor's budget? Yes, we're starting the list now.
Okay.
Director Goldberg will be building that list as we go through this evening.
So I believe there's $50,000 in here for looking at Consolidated City Hall, starting that work next year. Do you know where that is? I don't know where that is in the budget.
It is in the budget. I believe it's general funded, but yes.
Okay.
It is through the general fund.
Okay, I would like that on on the
As a
list.
potential reduction.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would like as a, on the list also, to whether to restore the community funds to the 2019 level, which is $69,775. I also would like to talk about the community center, the changes to the services. Openings at 5 and on Sundays. And I'll stop there for now.
Okay, so I think that last one on community services would be a proposed addition to the budget to allow for extended hours and services on Sunday. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the community funds too would be in addition to
And the
restore the.
community funds as a, isn't that a separate line item? Yeah, okay. Councilmember Hunt.
I would like to propose increasing the senior gold pass to $50 instead of the $125. So that will have an impact on the projected revenues for the budget. So all changes right now, right? We're looking for the list
Well,
of things.
I had Councilmember Goodman go through her list because I'm in deference to her health, but I generally like people to do one at a time. Just a cold, she wants to point out, but in deference to her voice. But I'd like us all to sort of just do one
Just
at
do
a
one?
time.
Okay.
Yeah. That's okay, no problem. So
was my
an
one.
increase to cover bringing the gold pass
I
down
think
to
we should.
50?
I think, well, it's still increased to make it $50.
Okay. But it increased to only.
So right now in the budget, it increased to $125. I would like to see it increase. I would like to propose that we increase it to $50.
Got it. So the increase in expenditure to allow us to only bring it to 50. Councilmember Ray.
I'd like us to discuss passing through merchant fees when we do credit card transaction, as many other cities and counties do at this time.
Okay. So you would like to see an
There's
increase in revenues
there's
that
a revenue
comes from
source associated with that.
from not absorbing the merchant fee.
Or a reduction in cost. I don't know which way it goes, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right. I have one, which is, remind me again, do we or do we not currently have a program for low-income individuals for cemetery fees? I don't think we do. Do we? We don't. All right. So we are looking at increasing cemetery fees, right? Yes. So I would like an addition that would cover a needs-based program, and I don't know exactly who would qualify for it. I'll throw out a number of 80% of AMI just as a starting point, what it would take to offer a mitigation program, I don't know what you want to call it, such that we could keep the current fees for people who make less than 80% of AMI for cemetery fees. Back to a jump ball. Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah, I'd like for the council to have a conversation about the COLA. We know that historically there was, well, we talked about two, there's a line in here for a 1% COLA for non-represented. And I think, again, in the spirit of, this is, I know out in the for-profit commercial world, these type of circumstances, everybody, who's involved has to put some skin in the game. And I think we should have that same conversation about actually there not being a COLA adjustment.
So your proposal is
Take that from 1% to 0%.
Got it. Moving from 1% to 0%.
We heard earlier in these meetings that represents about $72,000 in expenses.
Got it. Okay. Other proposed additions are Councilmember Walsh.
I'm trying to find the number, but basically the maintenance costs that were pushed off. The pavement.
198,000.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, okay, look, it may be a slightly different number, but I get what you're saying, and we'll come back.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, your mic was on. Council Deputy President Batiste.
So mine have been mentioned by others. Do you want a repeat at this point, or as long as they're on the list?
Yeah.
Okay.
This isn't, we're not at
Yep.
all deciding right now, thumbs up or thumbs down. It's just building the list. And Director Goldberg, I assume you will summarize at the end to make sure we got we got them all?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will, let me find it, and now I can't find it. Where is, darn it. Okay, well, somebody else, I'll come back to mine. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. I was also looking into the CIP and wondering if we can move some funding around or do things differently with the CIP. As I had mentioned earlier, I think that the CIP is a planning document, and then we make a plan, and then it is at budget the time when we can make some decisions about whether that plan makes sense. And I think we've received a lot of new information that might make us want to reconsider some of the things and the ways that we're funding things in the CIP. So I wanted to bring to our attention again that we have this I believe it's $4.4 million. It's expiring in 2021 for the planning of the city hall. And so I wanted that's general mitigation money. We will look at it. If we don't change anything, we will have one more opportunity, I suppose, to look at it next year. But generally speaking, I think I would like to have a conversation if we want to use that general mitigation money for something else.
So none of that is general fund, right?
It's general mitigation, general-mitigation.
But, sorry, that's not general fund.
No, it's not
right?
general fund.
So I think that probably more accurately goes in the potential council president letter rather than additions or subtractions. Generally speaking, we try to close the general fund in these conversations, but I thought,
May I ask a clarifying question?
sure, please
Yeah.
do.
Vicki, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Were you suggesting that there may be some funding for capital projects using general funds that, in lieu of using general funds, some of those mitigation funds could be used?
Yes, so there is,
Okay.
I think, yes.
Okay.
Does that help?
Quizzical look from Director
We don't
Goldberg.
What do you, what items were you thinking of when you said you thought that there could be some things that could shift, because that might help focus our
Okay,
work?
so Central Park Pad 3, general fund.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, and yes, and so,
So, yeah,
correct,
so,
it's general
yeah, so,
government
so
mitigation.
the general government mitigation, maybe I should just clarify, is not, they're not general fund dollars. They're mitigation fees that are paid to expand city facilities, and it's got to be capacity building. And so one reason why I was asking what you had in mind is that, again, kind of similar to the REIT question, we can look at it again, but felt like we did a pretty good scrubbing of what could be eligible. So I'm curious of what you're seeing as those potential facility capacity building things that are in the budget that we might be able to shift off of the general fund onto those mitigation dollars.
right, so there were two projects that were identified previously as potentially eligible for that funding that are currently funded by other sources, and they were the parking lot expansion project, which is in one of the out years of the CIP, so it would have to, the timeline would have to move, which doesn't help us in the current year. And then there was also the Highlands storage, and I wondered if it's possible that if we do the salt storage, if that would also be eligible for these funds. But I'm interested in taking a look at that, and I think I need more information to make good movement around those things, but I would like to put that on the table as part of our conversation, because I think we could move some of these things out. And generally, I also am just looking at the CIP and seeing so much planning for future things. I think we should revisit, I think we should revisit the amount of revisioning and planning and these sorts of things in light of our current budget situation, and take a look.
Looks like that's clear. Councilmember Winterstein. Okay. I would like to request that we look at an addition to cover the funds necessary to assure completion of Title 18 in 2020. Councilmember Ray.
I don't have an addition, I just have a kind of a comment. When we look at the discussion we had around revenue, where we were talking about a lower revenue source, and all I have heard pretty much for this discussion is more ads, I'm trying to figure out how we get the balance by doing this.
Ray, I'm not sure that's in the spirit of the conversation we're having right
Okay.
now.
So does that mean we will have that conversation at some future point?
I think it means that when we start going into thumbs up or thumbs down, I am confident you will provide a clear and articulate argument about being careful on thumbs upping additional expenses.
Okay, as long as I have some confidence we're coming back to this, because I'm doing a little hand wringing over here.
Understood. Then here's one you'll like. I would like us to, and I don't know how much dollars it would, I don't know how easy it would be for us to figure it out. I would like us to look at selling Tibbetts Valley Manor. I think that I've been saying for many years that we should not be in the, I don't think we make any money off of it. It carries a bunch of costs associated with it. And I think it could bring some revenue in at a time when the argument for owning a large residential home that we have sort of tried to find uses for over the years is not compelling.
Selling tickets to what?
Tibbetts Valley Manor, the big house in Tibbetts Valley where we have our...
That's why I was confused. I'm like, why would we get any ticket revenue off of? Thank you.
I'm glad I could clarify that for you. Councilmember Hunt.
I think generally, as part of the city services assessment, we should look at our properties and that as part of the services. I think there are other examples too, potentially. We haven't really done a good look at that. I would like to see a holistic look. Tibbetts, I think, is one we can discuss in particular. And then I had another one, which is I would like to discuss the increase to Arch contributions and administrative fees. That is the pass-through sales tax, but it seems to me that we're making a decision about how we're using that sales tax as part of the budget discussion. And so if that's the case, I'd like to.
Sorry, is that revisiting the existing decision by the council on arch fees?
No, it is not. So we had a presentation from Jean a while back, a month or so ago, about the state legislature's decision to increase or to have the cities receive the pass-through sales tax revenue. And so this is a $137,000 expense. And so it appears to me that by approving the budget, we're approving that use. But when we were presented with that information about that sales tax from the state, we were going to have a discussion about the use. And so I'd like to have that discussion before we approve it.
So you would propose that we consider retaining that money rather than passing it on to Arch?
I would propose that we use it to meet our local affordable housing strategic plan goals.
Administrator Bobkowitz.
And I think that any expenditure of those monies will require a council discussion. So I don't believe that there's anything in the budget that is earmarking it for Arch. I think it is just earmarked for affordable housing.
Well, I would disagree with that. I mean, it says,
I'm corrected that Councilmember Ray
That was
has
fast.
handed me the page. So we'll revisit that, and if the council's more comfortable leaving that decision for a future time, then we'll make an appropriate adjustment.
okay,
But it's on the list.
okay, I would like that, thank you.
Okay, on the list. Councilmember Goodman.
I just wanted to plus one to the suggestion that we also take a look at assets that we potentially don't need anymore.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
I'm not sure this is an add or a delete, it's more of a question. Where we have something such as this possible Arch contribution that's associated with a grant funding, so that if we don't do this, we don't get that. Can we have those identified so that we understand if we're taking this out, that there's a corresponding reduction in some sort of revenue?
I don't think that's the case on this particular one, but I'm assuming that
There are
the
others.
administration will flag such, the law of unintended consequences as they arise.
Do you want that in general or just for the things that are being discussed here? Because
I think for, in general, but, given the time is short, things that are being discussed. So if we're making a decision about, we're going to reduce this expenditure and there's an associated funding source with it, I just want to know that, so we're not throwing out the expenditure with the funding source.
yes, that we will definitely do that. And again, sort of the neurotic person in me will definitely be thinking about that.
Love the nerd.
Yes.
So when we come back, Council President, members of the council, on Monday next week, if there's anything like that, we'll flag that right off the top.
Okay. Well, we're coming up on 2 hours, and I would actually like to offer everybody a 5-minute bio break. So let's take 5 minutes. It's 8:27. Let's be back at 8:32. Thank you. All right, we are back. Thank you for the pause that refreshes. Additional additions or subtractions, Councilmember Winterstein.
It's actually not either, but it's in line with what we're doing. Council member, oh no, I'm sorry, Director, Finance Director Golden. The information that you gave us earlier, Beth, earlier, there's a slide that says that you have the different utility revenue levels. You got there in one click. That was really good. That I don't know that you provided that information to us in electronic format yet. Could you please?
I can.
Thank you.
I can. I can.
Councilmember
Thank you.
So this is relevant to REIT because this is a project that's funded by REIT 1. So the PWO salt storage cover, that project moved up in timeline, and it was previously appeared, it's in the CIP as a 2020 expense for $141,000, and I'd like to know if that can be 2022. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I was taking notes.
Yeah, I guess I said something wrong, so it's good. The PWO salt storage cover, that was previously going to be in this 2022 expense, and it's funded by REIT 1. It moved up and is now a current year expense. I'd like to know if we can delay it.
And we'll have to get more information to you, and I don't think Brett's here, but my understanding of the decision to accelerate that is that we need that salt storage so that we can store salt to respond to winter events, and that we have a liability for not having salt at our disposal by not doing that storage. So we can get more information, but there was, because we don't have a covered place to store the salt, and I think last year they were having to drive in somewhere in Seattle to get salt in the middle of the storm, and so that's one of the reasons we accelerated it.
Okay, so it was accelerated because of weather events that we now realize that we need?
We have material, if it's not in the budget document, it's somewhere that says that the current roof that's there is failing, and we have to do it sooner rather than later, or the salt that we have will be compromised, and we won't be able to store it there. So we have this material somewhere that says that's why we moved it up.
And we can resurrect that and retransmit it.
Okay. I would then be interested if that is because we need more salt, if it's a capacity.
It's not for
eligible
more
for
salt.
mitigation.
It is to protect
Well,
the
protect
salt that we have.
Okay, so it's more of a repair. Okay.
Councilmember Goodman.
Beth, yes, the budget or the fund that we use for city council, can you tell me where that is in here, in the budget?
The city council budget,
Yeah.
it's under the executive department, and I believe there is a legislative page within the executive department. Yes, page 32.
And then, how much of the budget that we have for council is for salaries, and how much of it is for other stuff? Do you know?
We can get you a breakdown of that. I don't believe we've got that at our disposal here, so, yeah, we'll get you.
202, 102 is the total, but it's not
Okay.
broken up. We can get you that breakdown.
Thank you very much.
Other proposed additions or subtractions? See people looking at their screens, but Nobody rushing for the mic? Going once? Anybody need any additional time? Going twice? Councilmember Hunt, you look deep in thought. Do you have any further?
I think I'm going to follow up on why if things can be moved around in the CIP, but it's probably better offline.
Councilmember Goodman? All right, well, I think, anything more, Councilmember Wardenstein? Anybody? So my understanding, or what I believe is going to happen, is the city administration is going to go back and look at both the specific items that we've identified this evening and the thrust of the answers to the question about how the budget was put together, and come back with a revision to incorporate some, but I'm guessing not all, of the things that we've discussed tonight. I'm sure Chris would have a conniption if we did all the additions. And then that will be transmitted, and we will have that before Monday. And then Monday, we will look to make potential revisions to that revised budget based on what we see, right? They will have included some stuff, and they will have not included other stuff, and we will be able to go line by line with the understanding that we need to get back to a balance at the end of the day. So, City Administrator Bobkowitz.
So, Council President, members of the council, what we would propose to do then is we will have a spreadsheet which will provide a hard copy, well, we can provide both hard and electronic to you as soon as we can with what we believe is sort of a comprehensive approach to what has been discussed here tonight. So we'll make recommendations agreeing with things. We'll have things that we're not in agreement to. We'll leave that as a separate, so it'll be clear that you can mix and match as you need to do. As we look at that scenario, you know, what I've heard from the council tonight, and I know there's not been a final decision, that we're in the 3 to 5 range, that if we were to propose something as part of a final package in that range, that my sense is that there would be support from the council. So I think what we will do is we will pick a percentage to fix on. I know the mayor has, in her memo from last week, had a 4 and 2 scenario. So I think what we'll do is we'll go back and look at that. I think that the number 4 is within the realm of what you've all discussed tonight. So just to put it on the table, and then along with the other things that we've heard. There are also items that have been listed for the council president's letter. I think what we'll do is we'll type those up so that you have, I envision this being different workbooks of an Excel spreadsheet. So we'll have one that will be the council president letter. There have been issues regarding what I would call 2020 projects. And so I'll just tell you what I put on here tonight. Benefit study, the idea of budgeting through a lens of the strategic plan, the city services assessment, looking at the economics of the jail, cable TV services, Munis, which I added as we were talking, and then a look at properties and assets. So we'll type that up, have that be a workbook for you as well. So we'll come back with that. Today is Wednesday. My hope is that if not by end of business Friday, perhaps Saturday, we would have something, a spreadsheet to you where there won't be a lot of explanation. I think you're well familiar with nearly all of this. It will just be a spreadsheet with numbers, with lines, and then we would use that to start the discussions on Monday. Does that sound like that will work?
Yes.
Forward?
And, I mean, explanation if you think an explanation is needed on something, right? If you're parsing it and it's important for us to understand if there's a limitation or you found a gotcha during the scoping of it.
Sure, and with the understanding that I would imagine you would allow us some time at the beginning of the meeting.
Of course.
To walk through and
Absolutely.
provide any narrative we would need to provide.
Yes. Director Goldberg, how many line items do you have, and can you briefly just list them so that in case people can keep an ear out for their most beloved items?
Yes, I can list them. Of course, utility tax is something that is still alive to discuss, and fund balance will come into play in these discussions. And then in terms of the adds to the budget that evolved a little bit into also just some general questions. I'll go sequentially. Councilmember Winterstein asked if REIT could replace some of the general fund for street operating. Councilmember Goodman asked that we cut the $50,000 for the City Hall planning, and also look at restoring the community fund and restoring community center hours. Councilmember Hunt wants to look at a lower rate increase for the Gold Pass, lower it from 125 as proposed to 50. Councilmember Ray wants to look at whether we can pass through the merchant fees to reduce expenses and increase revenues. Council President Martz wants us to look at a low-income program for the cemetery. Councilmember Winterstein wants us to look at a 0% COLA for 2020. Councilmember Walsh was concerned about deferment in the pavement management program. Councilmember Hunt wants to look at doing things differently with the CIP, focusing specifically on the $4.4 million of general mitigation fund that was dedicated to City Hall, and whether we can use that for other items, some of which include Central Park pad, the parking lot expansion, Highland storage, and the salt storage. Council President Martz wants funds to be allocated to assure completion of Title 18 in 2020. Council President Martz also wants to look at selling Tibbetts Valley Manor. Council Member Hunt piggybacked on that and said, let's look at surplus properties in general. Council Member Hunt also asked that we look at the pass-through money, the sales tax pass-through money to Arch, and whether that's something that we can do, meet our needs internally, I think is how I heard that be described, to meet the strategic plan objectives. Councilmember Ray asked that if anything is being proposed for a reduction that is revenue-backed, that we flag that so that we can avoid unintended consequences. And Councilmember Winterstein asked that we distribute that spreadsheet out to all council members. Councilmember Hunt asked that we look at the PWO salt storage and wants to understand more about why that project was accelerated from 2022 to 2020. And the last item on my list is Councilmember Goodman asked for a breakdown of the legislative department budget.
Councilmember Hunt.
So first, you answered the salt question, so you can strike that. The other one that I think is that was missed was I would like to know by the time we're approving the budget if it's possible. Not that I need to know the details of the program, but if it's possible to have programs in place for utility discounts for low-income individuals. And then that was also mentioned from Council President Martz about the cemetery fee, maintaining the current fee for cemetery for low income as well, or for a program. And so I would like to know that, and I didn't hear that in the recap.
All right. Well, actually, I will ask. I'll offer if any council members wish to have closing comments on tonight for the administration to understand as they put together this revision. I will offer the opportunity. You don't have to. We still have at least another day of this. Councilmember Walsh.
So I haven't been through this before, so I'm going to call the new card. I understand the idea of us representing asks for additions or removals. The part that I think I'm going to have a hard time, or I don't really understand how we're going forward, is on the utility taxes. So City Administrator Bobkowitz, I think you said it sounds like people are probably comfortable with 4% or scenario 4. I don't know which one you were saying there.
Yeah, so they're going to propose a bogey, right, that's less than 6. And we have absolutely, everything that they're going to propose, everything that's in the budget today and everything that they're going to add as a proposed modification, all that is open to us to change. So if they come back with, they're going to choose 3 or 4% because they think that's the sense that they heard from the body. But if the council says, you know what, we want to take that to 0, the council, if 4 council members want to take it to 0, they can. However, if they come in at 4 and we take it to 0, we have to come up with $1.1 million elsewhere to get the budget back to 0. We can absolutely do that, but then it is up to us to come up with that other 1.1 million. Does that answer your question? Because 1.1 million is the difference between the two options.
But that also adds another question. So is what you guys are going to propose to us then with these possible additions and subtractions then another version of a balanced budget, or are you just telling us what?
Yes.
Another version of a balanced budget.
That's why I said they're not going to include everything that we suggested this evening, because that's not balanced.
Exactly. Yeah, so okay.
So they're going to
Okay, I'll ask some questions offline, because I'm not sure I understand this.
They're going to take us to the balanced budget, attempting as well as they can to incorporate what they thought they heard tonight. But then again, in the end, it's up to the 7 of us. And so that next week will be so it's absolutely critical, as soon as they get us that spreadsheet, that all of us forgo our fun this weekend and go nose to it, and then next Monday night be ready to make potential revisions. Other questions, comments? All right, I want to thank city staff so much. This was an extremely productive conversation. I want to thank my fellow council members for a great dialogue. I think we made a lot of progress tonight. I'm looking forward to next Monday's conversation. With that, we are adjourned.